suggest that maybe we just stay on after the meeting to just have a quick chat about it, and then
Yeah.
okay. Hello everyone. I think hopefully you can hear me. Welcome to Design Panel meeting. We don't number them, but January 28th, 2021. I'm Charles Carroll, Chair. I think we have quorum. We have lots of members here tonight, which is great. And I'm calling the meeting to order. We are recording, I believe, and live streaming. So we have an agenda. Number one, call the meeting to order. Number two, introduction of late items. I don't believe we have any late items to introduce. Adoption of the agenda. Any questions or comments about the agenda? No. I'm just going to mention for design panel members, we did receive an email from Lania this afternoon about design panel procedures, etc. My suggestion is that we will mention that again in other business, and then if anybody has any questions or if we want to have a little discussion about it, what we'll do is adjourn the meeting and then we can stay on the line but not record, and we can just have a quick chat about it at that time, if that's okay. Adoption of minutes. Has everybody had a chance to review the minutes from our last meeting? Any questions or comments, revisions? Seeing none, can I get a motion to adopt those minutes, please? Kevin, seconded. Kate, thank you. And all in favor? Okay, those minutes are adopted. And we have one presentation this evening for a DP application on 6030 Lindley Valley Drive to be introduced by Caleb Marr.
Thank you. The one item on tonight's agenda is, yes, at 6030 Lindley Valley Drive. The proposal on this site is for a 152 dwelling multi-family residential development consisting of 3 buildings. The property is zoned Corridor 3, Community Corridor, and is within the General Development Permit Area Design Guidelines. The property is sited at the northeast corner of Lindley Valley Drive and Turner Road. There's been one variance request identified as part of this development permit, and that is for building height to vary the building height for one of the buildings from 14 meters to 16.2 meters, and for one other building from 14 meters to 16 meters. Oh, I apologize, there is the, no, that is the only variance request, yes. Okay, and with that, I will leave it to the applicant to begin the presentation.
Hi everyone, nice to see everyone again. Dave McGrath from WA Architects, so I'll just kind of run you through the project. We also do have landscape and civil also available to answer questions and talk about their disciplines. As Caleb was mentioning, this is a 3-building project. It is rental, it's purpose rental through the Malnar Group. So we have, I'm going to share my screen here with you. Hopefully my internet holds up. So please let me know once this has popped up.
That's good.
Wait, I see a thumbs up, so that's great, thank you. As Caleb was indicating, this is located at Lindley Valley Drive, at the corner of Lindley Valley Drive and Turner Road. There were a few challenges when I first jumped into this project to look at the feasibility and yield study on this. We have quite a lot of SRWs within this site, so I'm assuming that it does service a lot of the neighborhood for stormwater management Phil can talk a bit more about that. But we did have to maintain an SRW along this area, an SRW along this, full SRW along the back, and we're also curtailed by the Multi Creek in the back with a 7.5 meter riparian setback, and then the final SRW coming in from here. They kind of dictated how we were going to be accessing this site. So because the frontage improvement has been done, there's a turnaround at this area here, traffic turnaround, and this boulevard and all the curb has already been built. So the way I approached this is that we needed, because of the length of this site, was accessing this from 2 areas for vehicle access. And that was through one of the SRWs at this location between buildings B and C, and one at the end, the beginning of building A off of Turner Road. As we find with most of these projects, the limiting factor on this is the parking requirements. This was luckily not one. I mean, the great thing about this and how we were able to get the parking we did is because the natural contours of the site, as we're going towards Multi Creek, we're obviously going down. It gave us about 9 feet to 10 feet differential between where the road is to the back area. So it really allowed us to create a underground parking that's burned underneath the building. And hence, I mean, these 2 buildings were asking for a variance in height because of that, because the ground floor from the street level actually looks lower than what BC Building Code would categorize these buildings. Let me share with you the model, and we can talk about this a bit more about the aesthetics and form of character. So I'll this back up. Sorry about that. So let me just, from a bird's eye view, just talk about once again the entrances. We did create the pedestrian entrance through here since we already had a boulevard that did not allow us for vehicular entrance in that way. We created this more of a linear park, which Jim can talk about a little bit more. In the back of the area, what I wanted to bring up is that because we were talking about a 10-foot difference, it allowed us to really create the underground parking kind of burned and put and kind of tucked away out of the site. We did wanted to create, because of the length of the buildings, wanted to create a rhythm that broke broke down the massing of it. So I'm just going to zoom in on just one element on here, and it is the white element that you see on this location interlinked with the balconies. And this is consistent throughout. I wanted to have a very similar aesthetic throughout all of them, and then just differentiated by splashes of color. And so we started looking at, just the primary color for the entrance to really highlight this, and then similar conditions in a different color for all the other entrances as we're going along. We wanted to also create a lot of amenity space in this. If you've had a chance to look at the plans, and I can go through the plans individually, but we did provide, and this is very typical of the Muller Group, that we provide an indoor and outdoor amenity space, and then we take as much advantage of the site as possible to create outdoor spaces. We have a community garden on there that Jim can talk about a little bit more as well. But we wanted to centralize it within Building B. And one of the comments that we've had, and I know discussions with Caleb on this, is how do we get, it feeling that it is part of this whole development and everyone is allowed to use it. So we looked at having connections through, just walkways, different surface materials in order to have that connection through this. On the ground floor, we also have a fitness center in that area. We've also provided more than what is required for bicycle parking in it. Although we meet all of our parking requirements, I know as we're moving through, and I know there is some issues that are coming up with the repairing area, and we're trying to figure that out. And, once we start getting we're probably about 8, I think we're offering 188 parking stalls. When the calculations came out of what we're actually required, it's 174. So there's still wiggle room for us to take some parking spaces out of that and create a bit more green space as necessary. But as we know, as we're moving forward with all the other disciplines, that some of those will disappear because of whatever constraints that we're looking at. And right now, one of the constraints that we are looking at is a little bit of confusion on the 7.5 meter riparian setback. So some of those parking spaces may go, but we will take advantage of that as much as we can. The idea was also to create a lot of larger outdoor space and private balconies. And so you will see from these units that we do have some very substantial balconies in a lot of these spaces. I know that I had to fight with the clients to get these open, so I wouldn't have to get column placements in the corner, so we are going to be doing cantilevered beams, if not steel, in these areas, just in order to keep them as open as possible. We've also included as large a windows as the proforma could support. No one ever complains, except developers, about the sizes of windows, the amount of light that we get in there. I mean, if we could, everyone knows that the larger the windows, the more expensive it's going to be. We have included pop-ups in just strategic areas, so corner elements and all that. Even though we show on the model that these are pop-ups, that we are actually just for aesthetics, it would be a parapet in most of these conditions. And similarly, this is a rental project, and we're always challenged with how do we make this work with the aesthetics that I'm trying to portray on this. I did want a very clean aesthetics. If most of you have been I've been present at when we've had other DAPs, and my aesthetic is a very modern touch to it. So clean lines and trying to show some interest in these collision of forms, and that's what I've tried to do here as well. Select put my rules together so that it is rigorous around the entire design. Select a palette that then I can evenly disperse between all the buildings, and then have something that separates and identifies each building separately. And so one of the things that Jim will talk about on this and is we look for opportunities where we can integrate some of the landscaping into it. We've had planters here where we've talked about whether it's Virginia creepers, is something that we have the landscape starting to integrate with the building, so we put some wires or some elements that the plants themselves can grow onto, and then have some of that interest, some of that green integrated within the design itself. What else can I say on this? The entrances, because of the grade changes, I know that sustainability or accessibility was one of the issues we talked about. Because of all the parking is in the back, we did the accessibility from the back entrances, and they're both. We cannot, for the residents of this is probably their front door. For anyone visiting, it's going to be this, but then can be directed if mobility issues are into the back areas or the front door facing the creek. I think that's about it on the presentation for aesthetics. I know that the building facing the corner, we did, because of the length of it and the numbers, we decided to put the height into the building B and C and reduce the size, the height of building A, because it was already a long building. I took the center part, at least the knuckle part, and I cut out quite a lot of the massing out of that area in order to make it look like two separate buildings. But this one is only 3 stories visible. By BC building code, it's considered a 4-story building, but that's because of the bermed parkade in the back. One of the, because of the cost and trying to figure out ways to reduce cost, one of the things we did is we opened up the parkade as much as we could. So these are security grills or security fencing. We're still picking what that element is going to be, but it's breezeway parking, so that we didn't have to have this mechanically vented, which we all know is a big cost on it. So wherever possible, except for areas like the bike storage areas or mechanical rooms, it's just open. You'd be able to see right through into the parking areas from the back area. With that, I will hand it over to Jim to talk about. And Jim, I can pop up your site plan for your landscaping, or unless you want to do that.
No, that'd be great, David.
Okay. Let me know when you can see that.
That's civil.
It has it
Yeah,
on.
there we go.
Okay.
Yeah, there we go. Okay, so I'll follow up with what David's introduction was. Couple things. Lindley Ave Streetscape is completely finished. Looks like it was planted 2, 3, 4 years ago. So the trees are just starting to get established, but there was nicely done, large boulevards and plumber trees along there. There's curb cuts where the entry to the site is, right where it says Lenny Valley Road. And so that's an existing access to the site. I'll just walk through, it's a linear site, and normally that would be problematic, but the way Dave and his team has worked out the access and the buildings, it turns out that we ended up, we always try to get as much amenity in the space as possible, and if we start at the west end, I'll just touch on the major spaces. So in the sort of just midpoint on building A, across from the corner entry at the rear of the site, there's a fairly significant tot lot play area, seating, and it's amongst some existing trees in that area that we were able to save. Between between Building A and Building B, there's a linear park with seating in the core, quite heavily planted, that accesses, one of the accesses from the front to the rear of the site. Between Building B and C, that's where David was talking about the upper level amenity area related to the indoor amenity area, and that's adjacent to the access. We had a 2-meter walkway there originally with a couple rows of trees to accentuate the entry into the building. As part of the review comments from the city, they requested a 3-meter walkway because it's part of a major walkway connection. And as part of that amenity, it connects to kind of a social area, seating area, and a crossover across the creek. And on the opposite side of the creek, there's a 3-meter hard surface trail by others, and that's part of a linear creek. And of course, because of the creek, there's a 7.5-meter setback on either side, which is undisturbed, and that's part of the riparian zone. So a lot of amenity area. There's a couple more areas just to the east of Building C. On the creek side, there's a garden area with raised garden plots and a garden shed, compost area, and some picnic tables. And that's got reasonably good exposure to the south as well. And at the far east end of the site, there used to be a PMT transformer that almost took all that space, and it was relocated, so it's kind of an open green space for informal use. So we're happy with the amount of amenity, and it's well distributed. It's not all in one area. It creates social opportunities for people to mingle and get to know each other. And apart from that, we've got lots of opportunity to introduce planting in the parking areas and along the frontage. So, we're pretty happy with it, and I think it'll turn out, it'll appear like a well-landscaped project and very livable project. Thanks. Oh, and I apologize for not being covered. That was our scheduling oversight, so my apologies for that.
Okay, maybe we can talk about the civil drawing with storm management considerations. We have, I wasn't sure if,
Yep, Scott's here.
Oh, okay.
Yep, from J. Anderson, Scott Stevenson, civil engineer. So the site is very well serviced currently for water and sanitary. There's an existing sanitary main that runs throughout the property from east to west, and it's got some services already connected to it that we will be using. Water is along Linley Valley, and there are as well some service connections that we can use. We're choosing the one nearest Building A. From Building A, then it will be distributed on site to each of the other buildings. So it will just be one common city meter with private backflow prevention behind it. For stormwater management, we are proposing underground rock pits with the amount of hard surface from the buildings and the parking area. There will be some ability to use absorbent topsoil and landscaping features that will coordinate with Jim, but otherwise we'll be using rock pits under most of the parkade areas as well as Building B. The complication was that existing sanitary main takes up a lot of space, and we wanted to stay clear of that, protected from any groundwater. So we pushed rock pit under Building B that would be coordinated with structural and geotechnical for foundations. But essentially we're trying to retain up to the 100-year storm so that the creek is well protected. as well as downstream pipes are not impacted with capacity. Yeah, no problem.
So maybe one of the things I did not cover is kind of the unit mixes that we do have in this. We obviously wanted this to include a wide range of demographics and income. And so we have everything from a studio that is about 500 square feet all the way to a 3-bedroom, 2-bath at about 1,200 square feet. Taking advantage, especially in the corners where we did locate the 3-bedroom units that have more perimeter exterior wall. So I will just run you quickly through just typical, actually building B is probably the better one to go through. These are very loud colors. So as I was mentioning, we've taken advantage as much of the grading in order to so we can passively vent the parquet. And so areas where we have been able to open it up, so these are the security gates that this opens up. We will look at other locations that we can do it as well. Noticing here that there's opportunity to open up some of the structure as well in order to get more of the grading and have this more of a transparent look. As I said, we've also located as much bicycle parking as possible. As we're going through this a little bit more, and we find that we still have more parking available to us, they will be, we'll look at and discuss with planning as well whether we can add a bit more landscaping areas, or if it's within the building, more spaces for amenity as well. I think I've covered everything I need to, and I'm open up to any questions that you may have.
Okay, thank you, David.
Thank you.
I will, if you could do me one favor and just stop sharing your screen so I can actually see everybody. That would help.
Sure.
Thank you. Okay, as I always do, I will first ask panel members if there are anyone has any questions for staff. Seeing none, I will go into questions and comments for the applicant. And I'm gonna find the right people here. No, not Jim. Tony.
Okay. I think I'd like to start by congratulating the applicant for a very well thought out design on a very, very challenging site. Given the site shape and dimensions and topography and all of the SRWs, it almost designed itself from a site planning point of view. But that being said, within those limitations, I think that the overall form and character is second to none. Some of the things that I particularly like are the size of those large windows. That makes a huge difference from the appearance from the outside, as well as obviously the advantage to the interior. I was pleased to see the 3D model that you had of the whole complex, because just looking at the individual ones, it's kind of hard to get a sense of the whole streetscape, which I think is important. I tossed around for a while the notion that each of the buildings and all the elements on it was extremely similar, same colors, same kind of modulation, and massing, and repetition, and that kind of thing. But I came to the conclusion that overall, when I saw that 3D model, it really all hung together. And I think that, given the length of that building, I think there's a great deal of articulation in the massing vertically, horizontally, colors, details, other things that I don't think will be monotonous at all. I think it's going to be quite quite a nice streetscape, and also a view from the other side, from the side. On the height variance, I do see a huge concern with that, given that it's generated primarily by the grade. So I didn't personally think that would be penalized because of that thing. One comment that staff made that I did agree with was whether the units on the ground floor facing the street could in fact have individual entrances or some kind of little patio, private outdoor space, something to add another small level of streetscape animation to that, as well as a different opportunity of unit type. I think that's kind of my once over lightly, so thank you for the presentation, and I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony.
Thanks, Tony. Kate?
Okay, first, thank you very much for your presentation. And I'll just agree with Tony. I really like the scale and design of the architecture. And I too was wondering, would I want to see anything? I think having the different pops of color around each entry may be enough to differentiate the three buildings. But I find the scale very nice, and I think it will fit in with the development that's currently going on in that neighborhood. So I'm going to speak more about the site design and the landscape. So looking at the staff comments, I agree with reducing your parking and increasing your landscaping. In particular, I would rather see the parking reduced outside than underneath the building, because I think you have some opportunities to increase the sort of vegetative buffer to your site and the adjacent riparian area. And I also would like to, I agree with the staff comments that I would like to see a continuous sort of planting along that edge of that existing creek. I'm sure the landscape architect's just not quite sure. I think your intention is probably to do that. Is that correct? I'm just looking at this slide.
You're talking about the additional buffer between parking?
Yes.
Yeah, we actually have quite a bit of planting in there. There was during our internal review with clients, there was a comment that adding to the coniferous native 7.5 meters for the sake of adding another couple of meters, they'd like to see something more extending, maybe more variety, more color, more flowering characteristics, as opposed to a couple extra meters of the same green space that's already there. So that was a comment, and that hadn't shown up in drawings yet.
Okay, yeah, well, I don't have a problem with it being the same as what's there. I kind of like that, but if I'll leave it up to you what plants you put in, but I would encourage all of that edge to be really fully planted. I think it would improve that would be great. Also, so I would like to also, I agree that I think you need to sort out how people are moving through the site from the different amenities you have created. The community garden, even though it's great to have, it does feel very isolated and not, from my understanding of the site, it doesn't seem like there's an easy way to access it, or from the building, it feels, I think you have to cross through just the parking, is that correct, to get there? So maybe to rethink how your residents are actually going to use that space, where I don't think it will be used, and it will be kind of wasted, and it could just be plants. So again, I agree with the city to improve your sort of pedestrian accessibility of all your amenity spaces between the buildings. And I think I like your linear park that you referenced between the two buildings, and it is a shame that you can't have those trees between the other two, but I do understand the desire of the city to have their wider connecting public path, so that's too bad, but I understand. And I hope you will, I imagine you will be including site lighting and bicycles, and I saw that there was a note about green walls, and is that what the architect, what you spoke about near the entryways, having some kind of growing structure? Yeah, I think that could be quite nice. That could be a nice way of highlighting your entry. I would also encourage you to think about the back entry, because I'm imagining, it's hard to tell. It looks like you might have a few plants around one or two, but if you can, there's a lot of great evidence for this sort of what they're calling now micro doses of nature, and that the entryways to buildings, the entry and exit to buildings have become, adding vegetation at all of them has become more important, because that's the first sort of point that's where you're coming in and out of. And so in particular, I think the back entrance is where you're coming out of your car, which are probably going to be used the most by anyone who's driving who lives here, to give them a little bit of that green by where they, before they come into their home or when they leave and go off to work or whatever it may be. So I would encourage you to see if you can carve out a you're lucky you are able to reduce your parking. Many times we're just trying to fit the parking in, so there's opportunity for you to reduce that hardscape and add a little bit more plants here and there, and I would encourage you around the back entry. Let me just see. Yeah, and around the top lot to remember that the vegetation and the natural elements are a part of their play as well. So as you sort of design the edges of that structure, keep that in mind. Okay. But I think it's a great addition, and what a great place to live, to have that stream right behind you and have access to that public walking space. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kate. Tyler?
Thanks, Charles. I have one question through to staff. I tried, my mouse stopped working, so I couldn't actually flag anything before. So it's just in relation to that, I noticed that there's a bridge over the creek and then a future path. I noticed that the parcel, I think, on the other side is a rezoning application. Is that something that will be looked to be secured through that separate application?
Through the chair, yes, that is something we are looking at to see what opportunities there might be and to find out if that is feasible, because there is a grade to work with, and to see how that might fit into the site planning. But yes, that rezoning application is still under review, so we are looking at the connections that could be made.
Thank you very much, and that's really good to hear. Really just want to, thanks for the presentation. I spend a lot of time in this particular area. It's near my house, and I walk it a fair bit, and I think it's a great project on a really challenging parcel. I've always been looking at that for the last couple of years, wondering how that would be developed and come together, and so I think you've done a really good job. And Tony, I walked down there and sort of had the similar thoughts to yourself around the uniformity of it, and I actually think just with the way that street goes and that roundabout goes, once it's physically built, it will probably be less of an impact than it actually is on the models as being so uniform. And I think it actually works really nicely and will fit in nicely with the street. Really agree with Kate that it reflects nicely with the development that's going on in that area. I would just emphasize that I would be fully supportive of less parking and more landscaping. Obviously, your mind's already going there, but just want to re-emphasize that I think that would be a great addition. And on any of these creek systems, I think the more natural and localized vegetation, the better, just because they are diminishing, and we want to try to retain or rehabilitate or restore as much as possible. So this one just further support for Kate's comments. Thank you, and great project.
Thank you. Thanks, Tyler.
Thanks, Tyler. Steve?
Thanks for the presentation, guys. Really well put together. I do have a couple of comments, but they've pretty much been echoed by Tony, and when it goes to the parking is the big thing. Reducing parking and having more green space makes all the sense in the world. And just one last thing in regards to the linking that Kate had mentioned. Something as simple as a changed material, a stamped concrete or something that can tie that in and kind of give that. It's pretty hard going through a parking lot because you don't want to have people going on the parking lot as much as possible, but in this case it would probably make a heck of a lot of sense to have something that's different and basically shooting them to that amenity space outside. So the project's great, well put together as always, and looking forward to seeing it built. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Steve.
Thanks, Steve. Marie?
Yeah, thanks. I concur with a lot that's been taken so far. Great project and great location, especially in proximity to all the services. You've got grocery stores, transit, everything within walking distance, which is really fantastic. So a good spot to put a sort of a high density project like this. And I think especially also its relationship to that creek. So I also concur with Kay, if you can kind of integrate that natural environment with the property, all the better, expanding amenity space so that people can kind of feel like they're part of that. I think that's a real advantage of that site. In terms of the form and character of the building, I agree again with all the comments that have been made. My only comment would be an aesthetic one. Your introduction of color on the different buildings, I kind of like that for differentiating, but it almost feels gratuitous in a lot of the places. Like there's a little bit stuck here, a little bit stuck there, and I'm just wondering if there's any way that you could try and integrate that color a little bit more overall across the different buildings. It would make it a little bit more obvious as well when you look at the building, if this is the red building, the green building, or whatever, right? But I think also aesthetically, it would fit in a bit better. I'm just looking like it's a bit stuck on. So that would be my one comment about the form and character. My other concern or interest was, I noticed in the proposal that you're going to include, I think it was 10% of the units would be accessible units for handicap accessible. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes. Oh, okay. I wasn't too sure where in the building those were located. Are they on the plan? Like I looked at the plans and all the washrooms look all tiny and.
No, so those, we've highlighted the larger 2 bedrooms for that, and the units themselves still haven't been expressed as that. So the larger corridors, whether we put in openings on it, but those are the ones that we have identified that can be converted.
And those would be there'd be a handicap unit in each of the buildings?
Yeah, so we talked about adaptable units as well as accessible units. There's a big difference in it. As long as we make it easy for us, if we do have something that is more challenged, that those changes can happen with ease. And then we'll look at some that then we can expand on quarter widths and grab bars and have the space in the bathroom for turnarounds and all that.
Right. Because I think it's a great location for that because the sidewalk infrastructure, the groceries nearby, somebody could easily have a motorized wheelchair, for example, and manage almost independently depending on their abilities. Keeping on that topic though, I'm just wondering about, you said the person say the accessible access would be in the back, not in the front. Is it impossible to get into the front? Is there stairs?
Because of the grade change right now, that we needed to meet also high water flooding levels. So we don't have just a 9'6" clear in the parkade. It's actually much higher in order for us to meet that requirement. Because we had to elevate things like any major services to the building could not fall within that flood zone. So we had to elevate those. And the way we determined the ground floor plane, first floor off of Turner, was to take the minimum height requirements for the mechanical and electrical room and push that up as high as we could in order to avoid the flood. And then that gave us what the elevation of that floor was. And that put us above where we needed a few steps from the street in order to get up to. And there's no, because of the proximity of it, putting a ramp just took up so much of the green space, and it really was, we had, actually it's more than 3 steps, and I mean, Adrian, you can speak to that more because you were the one working on that, but it ended up being like a 20-foot ramp in front of building A, and that we wanted to be more of a focal point where we had landscaping and a connection to that roundabout.
So my concern with them using only the back entrance, which I'm assuming then would be level. I saw the parking spots were close to the entrance, and then they would go in a flat entrance door, and then there would be the elevator to get up to upper floors. Right. Is that correct? Yeah. So to get out, say, down to the grocery store, they'd have to go all the way around the building.
Yes, unless they're taking a vehicle, then they would go to the back, or anyone else would, Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I'm just thinking I'd like to make sure that the sort of sidewalks and movement for people who have mobility issues are not going to be hampered in that movement. And the other concern would be if you have people being picked up a handy dart or a wheelchair taxi, where do they go? They're going to have to stop in the parking lot. There's no pull-in area for such transportation, or the bus is going to have to come into the parking lot to drop them off. I'm just wondering if you thought of these sorts of things, because this is what also makes the building truly accessible.
Yeah, I suppose, we can use some of these extra parking spaces to create a loading zone within those areas.
It might be something you want to think about, just to make sure that, the building is capable of taking a variety of people with different needs.
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, I appreciate the effort here, and it's great. Look forward to seeing this project come to fruition. So, thank you.
Thanks, Marie. Kevin?
Yeah, thanks for the presentation. I'll echo what pretty much everyone else is saying. It's obviously a very challenging site. I think we should thank the civil engineers that put in the sewer right away from city staff to put them in a location that allows the buildings to be pushed out towards the street. I think working within a tight envelope like that is always challenging. I know when I have projects like this that have tougher challenges, they always turn out to be the most fun. So well done, Dave, and what you've done with the siting of the building. Forming character, I agree with pretty much everybody in their comments. I think you've done a great job relating the buildings to the street. Use of materials, large windows, everything I pretty much totally agree with. Questions I have, Dave, you mentioned these are all rental units, or are they going to be available for rental?
No, they are rental units. The Mulner Group specifically, that's their bread and butter, and that's what they specialize in.
That's good. That's really good to hear. I agree with a lot of most of my concerns and comments have already been brought up. I would say if I'm disappointed with anything, it would be that I'm disappointed that you couldn't get at least one of the buildings to have their main lobbies accessible. Like Tyler said, this is on my wife and I's main walking route that we take. We walk by this all the time. And I've seen many motorized wheelchairs, people coming up down from Nelson and coming up in that area. And with the amenities that are available in the neighborhood, I think if you can, even if one of the buildings get an accessible access on the front, I think that would be that would turn out to be work really well, especially if you're going to have accessible units inside the building. I don't think there's a real good pedestrian link around the rear of the building, and if somebody has to ride on a motorized wheelchair all the way around the back to building C, the chance of a car backing out, the danger of that, I just don't feel it would work well. And I'm not sure if you studied that and whether or not there's a way you can get a better pedestrian link around the rear of the building. But that was brought up in staff comments too, and I just wonder if you want to comment on that, Dave.
So we did, I did talk to Caleb about that, and we are looking at ways of linking, visually linking routes and access through the site. We understand we've kind of localized all the interior amenities within Building B, and so we do need to look at that a bit further. I will definitely talk to my clients and Adrian. We should look at the buildings, seeing how we can minimize the impact on that. One of the reasons that I did go to just having access off the back is because of it was a big impact of those ramps in the front, where we ended up taking a lot of the green space away from the buffer zone that we're creating for these ground floor units. And to me it was, well, okay, so we either take it away from the front, which is a huge impact on just the aesthetics of the building, and have the access off the back, and that's kind of the route we'll do. But we definitely will circle back and look at seeing if there is opportunity to do that within one of the buildings that moves.
Yeah, thank you. I think it'd be worth an effort just to readdress that. Aside from that, regarding some of the form and character concerns I might have, I think it was brought up about the main entries, the main lobbies being a little bit hidden in a lot of aspects, and I think it was brought up using potentially green walls and stuff like that to highlight the entranceway. And I would agree if that was one of the recommendations earlier. I would recommend that you do something with the main entries to make them a little bit more noticeable.
We are actually doing green walls within the entries of the Building A and Building C.
Okay. And it was brought up in staff comments too, the use of the accent colors, and Marie mentioned that too. It seems some of the buildings had a little bit more use of their accent colors. Building A looked like there wasn't as much, and staff mentioned the aspect of possibly increasing the use of the accent color, and I would say I would agree with that, and also that making sure that the buildings are balanced in their use of the accent colors, so one doesn't really have a lot more than the other.
Can I respond to that, Kevin?
Sure. Yeah, please.
So the way I typically do the design, so I will kind of set up my set of rules and make sure that is consistent throughout all of it. And then once I start going into it and seeing use in certain specific areas, as long as I have logic for changing it, I would change and break those rules. So when you're saying the consistency of color within all buildings, they are consistent. So there is, if we go through it, I've located them on the top floors for color and impact, and that's happening every place that I have the white blocks happening. And then on top of that, then the entrances are then highlighted with that same color and form.
Yeah, I thought I noticed that the use of the accent color, the green and the red, and that in the use of the building, I thought I didn't see much of it, the green in Building A. Am I wrong?
It should be consistent unless I missed it on the DP.
Yeah, so I'm just looking at mostly the building A, and all I'm really seeing is maybe a little bit, most of it's really on the entranceway, and it's kind of set down a bit, but I would just put it out there, just make sure that is, and I'm not sure what your thoughts of increasing that palette, but I thought that was one of the things that really helped make each building unique in its own individual way, was the use of that color. It kind of what set each building apart.
Okay, good comment.
The only other one was another one that staff brought up regarding the weather protection over the exit doors. Please, did you read that? Making sure that there's roofs or whatever over exit doors. And there's some exit doors at the rear of the building.
Yes, there are, yeah.
Okay. And one final question. The access road that goes down between building B and C, does that have, I can't tell from the drawing, and I'm not sure if this is for you, Dave or Jim, does that have a sidewalk that goes down through there?
Yeah, 3-meter walkway.
A 3-meter walkway, good. And that goes across, that's going to be a textural change that'll go across to the bridge?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Perfect. That's all I have. A very nice job, a very thorough job. And again, we need rental units, and this is going to be a really, really nice building, or buildings, and a great job. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Kevin.
Okay, thanks, Kevin. I'll make this easy because I think my colleague spoke. Kate?
I'm sorry, I just forgot one little comment.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
It was just regarding the community gardens, because we're seeing those included on a lot of projects, and they're part of your density bonusing, and so they're, but just to be cognizant, to consider the fact that there's a lot of deer around here, so if you're truly thinking about those being community gardens, you need to establish some kind of fencing or enclosure for those, and also that you do need a place for tools, so whether it's a shed or...
We do have a shed.
Okay, I couldn't... Yeah, so then, yeah, that's all. And just to think of that as well in the design. That's all.
Can I just make a comment? I find it interesting. So we try to put in community gardens in all our projects, as many as we can. And what we find with municipalities on the island, they're like, well, sometimes they won't get used. Here in Vancouver, you're probably a year waiting before you can get into like anywhere, like Burnaby as well. I mean, you're waiting a long time to get into one of those community gardens.
Yeah, I think rental properties are sometimes challenging because of it depends on the turnover of your renters versus some where you may have a mix of owners and renters as far as how they're used. But yeah, I know. Yeah, but I think to make them successful is to design them so that they can be successful.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Kate. David, I have a couple of questions, kind of specific, but hopefully you can answer them. The breezeway between buildings A and B, I'm assuming that has stairs, is that correct?
Yes.
It does have steps, yes.
Okay, and then your main access between buildings B and C, your driveway access, you mentioned that it's like a 3-meter, plus or minus 3-meter grade change. So is that that's going to be like a ramp slope going into the site, is it not?
We calculated it before. Adrian, you might want to speak to this because I know that elevation has been changing.
And it's between B and C? Or between A and B?
No,
Between B and C, where we have the 3-meter sidewalk.
Yeah. I mean, I think that would be... I actually don't know what the elevation is.
Charles, I think I did a calculation on that, and I think it's less than 8%, and it's actually not too much more than 5%, but it's over 5%. Should probably over 5%.
Okay, you know where I'm going with this.
I sure do.
Because I'm, echoing all the comments of my colleagues, or comments of some of my colleagues. I think one of the key points for me was the question of your connectivity, whatever you want to call it, pedestrian linkage around the rear. And it's especially important in this case because all of your access to your building is at the rear. Even though you've got frontages on the street, they're kind of showcase entries. Sorry, my glasses keep fogging up. So anybody who's coming down, anybody who's mobile, who's coming down, they can walk out the front door. That's great. But anybody who's taking a stairway down is going to be coming out at the lower level. Anybody who's using an accessible access is going to be coming out the rear. So number one for me, that just reinforces the previous comments that pedestrian linkage at the rear of the site is critical, not just for access to the landscaping, but for wayfinding and for access for everybody. And I know you've treated the rears like fronts, but I think you need to go beyond the building and treat the whole parking area as your building front. And then that leads me to my concern, which is if that ramp gets anywhere more than 8%, you won't be able to use it as an accessible access way. And you'll be forced to put in a ramp somewhere. So I like Marie especially and a couple of the other comments, I really encourage you to look at ways that you can get access to your street frontages because you may be opening a big can of worms if you're relying on the rear for all of your accessibility, especially with the new code requirements for accessible pathways to your main entrance. So that was one of my concerns. And then Kevin picked up on the same comment I was going to make, which is, I think Kevin said, be consistent with your use of color. And I noticed the same thing when you were spinning around the model, that on building A, for example, you have the green at the inner elbow, at the rear, and it is going all the way up the building. But at the front of the building, it's just on the portal frame. And I think that's maybe your logic, is that it's one thing on the rear, one thing on the front. But I would encourage you, like everybody else, to consider, if you're going to run the color up at the rear full height above the entry, then maybe do the same at the front, and then it's consistent on both sides of the building. And then it begins to highlight those entrances on the front and the rear the same way. Those were my two. Everybody else has sort of picked up on all the others. The thought about connecting the ground-oriented, or the ground units to be more ground-oriented units, I like the idea. I always try and do that when we have a chance, but I understand completely that the grade change you are dealing with would make them, again, it's going to be a lot of hardscape stairs and gates and all kinds of stuff on the front of the building. So I think it was, I can't remember who, it was Tony, I think it was Tony actually, who also mentioned it and said maybe it's just a different treatment for those ground units that makes them a little bit more special. So maybe it's a little landscaping change or something. But otherwise, like everybody else, I appreciate what you've done and the work you've done, and I do like the, similar to Tony and other comments, the uniformity of the treatment of the buildings I think will work because you have other things that are going on that are slightly non-uniform, some of the detailing, some of the frames that you're doing, and yes, big windows. I'm a fan of big windows as well, so I think that's all working. I think it's just some minor tweaks to the use of color at the entries, and then a pretty serious, especially if you're going for 10% accessible units and not lumping them all into one building. Accessibility in the units is important, obviously, but getting into those buildings is equally important, and it needs to be really thought through across the whole site. Okay, with that, does anybody else, any other panel members have any other comments? Marie?
I just had a question. There was also mention of artwork.
Oh, yes.
Wondering where that was going to be located and what thoughts you had on that?
Well, first, it's still in process. We know that we've kind of narrowed, we're looking at artists before we say this is what it's going to be able to have obviously input from the artist, but it is going to be a sculpture or something. We'll locate a place for it. It's just early stages right now. We're trying to kind of narrow down our scope. We talked about similar to a project that I was here before where we had the murals. We talked about that, but I don't think that there's opportunity for that to happen on this one. So we're looking more of an object art piece.
Okay, and I hope, just still not sure what's happening with the city. There was some talk of a committee or some group to help define and sort some of these issues out about public artwork. So I'm hoping that.
So we have been in touch with the cultural department on that. Adrian, do you want to?
Yeah, we just got in touch with Alison, and she gave us some initial starting points as to what the expectations are and the goals of the community plan. So we're taking that into account in the artist selection process, and we're just at that stage really at the moment.
Okay, well, good to see you. It's always nice to have some extra visual aspects to these projects. So great, thank you.
Charles and David, I wanted to make a comment, if I could.
Yes, go ahead.
So the news about the parking was fairly recent, and it's fairly significant because we were working quite hard to try to save some of the existing trees next to the riparian zone, as well as get in these amenities. And the comment, they're all good comments. The comments about planting near the entries, that was something that sort of fell short in the present form. The access on the back, because of just the sheer dimension between typical building module and a typical parking module, and if you look at the site, not much room left to play. So to be honest, early on we kind of accepted that walking in the parking area at the rear of the site next to the park was going to be the way it worked. The major walkway is on the opposite side of the creek, and just so everybody doesn't get disillusioned like I did, it's not a bridge that was built, it's just a land embankment with a culvert going through it. So a little disappointing, but it'll work, but it could have been a little nicer. Anyway, another thing that came up with the density bonusing, we are looking at more permeable paving. There's a chance that all the parking stalls at the rear of the building may go to permeable paving. It just depends on how the economics of the density bonusing works for rental housing. But that's a potential, and I think in my mind that will go a long ways to creating a different feeling in the parking. It won't feel like a high traffic area, even though there's a fair number of cars back there. And the reduction in the cars will allow us to do two things. Enhance the entries, which are fairly constricted now. And I think there's 11 cars between the main 3-meter walkway and the entry to the elevator entry to the building B. And if that's within the numbers, potentially that could be good access, because I think we can get the main sidewalk below 8% down to the rear entry. And we were part of the discussion and the question with all the ramps, because there was a point where building A and B were ramped, and we were actually trying to save some trees at building B. The arborists have since said that that's not possible, but I think Dave's correct when he said that the floodplain issue or flood level issue really made a huge difference, and it was significant. There was a lot of ramps to make it work. But I think in a combination with the more flexibility in the parking and some more permeable materials, I think there's a lot of things we can do as it goes forward to address a lot of these
thanks, Jim. Okay, I'm frantically writing as everybody's speaking because I have this fun job that Kevin's so good at, but I'm not so good at it. So, I have one question. I think it was Marie who first brought it up, and I kind of also mentioned it, and it goes to what Jim was just kind of speaking about. Does the panel agree that we would include as a recommendation the consideration of making the building street entrances accessible where possible? Is that
I think it's important. I think it's an important recommendation because if they can do it from the front, I think for any residents who have mobility issues, it means they don't have to go all the way around. I think the stores are closest to the front entrance. That's where they're going to want to head, and you're asking them to do quite a long detour around the building to get to the shopping center, for example.
okay?
We not say to consider improve accessibility generally throughout the site.
Yeah, I think that's good because that's front and rear. So,
and probably consider too, like transportation issues. Again, the handy bus. I don't know if I'm not sure if they will go into a driveway to pick people up or want them up on the street level. So that may pose mobility issues as well if they have trouble picking people up. You have no pull-in area anywhere.
right. Okay. Thanks, Tony. I think that's a good way to word it. Accent colors. Okay, so I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I have 4 recommendations. I've done my best to craft these, so I will read them. I'm trying to be good and actually craft them properly. So I have 4 that I've written down. Number 1, it's a bit wordy, but bear with me. Reduce excess surface parking and look at increased landscape treatments at the creek edge buffer and adjacent to rear building entrances. See some nodding heads? Okay.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Number 2, consider paving material treatments to define pedestrian access and wayfinding through parking areas to connect the buildings and amenities. Okay.
Sounds good.
Number 3, consider making improvements to accessibility generally to all buildings. And number 4, and actually didn't finish writing this one out, consider the consistent use of accent colors to identify building entrances and the different buildings.
I could suggest, I would again take the easy way like my last statement, just say consider expanding the use of the accent colors, period, because that's all I think we're talking about. It's kind of nominal in some places and quite dramatic in others. And, whether we want the consistency in there or not, I don't know, but
okay, so
I would agree with Tony.
okay. How about to consider expanding the use of accent colors to identify buildings or to identify the buildings?
I don't see why you need that. I mean, they're doing that already, but just to kind of expand it a little bit. And,
yeah, I think it's more of an aesthetic question. I think they already identified the building. It's a matter of expanding them and integrating them within the building design.
There's a red, blue, and a green one, so just a little more of that, I think, would really add something to the overall aesthetic.
Okay, one more try. Okay, consider expanding the use of accent colors in the building designs.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay. Now, is there anything, I know, Kevin, you had a couple of points that I didn't flag necessarily as recommendations.
Yeah, I had two other ones, and we can discuss it whether or not you want to include them. One was whether or not we wanted to include having direct connections from the ground floor units to the street. We had a discussion on that, but I'm not sure. Dave had his rationale on it, and I'm more than willing to discuss that to see whether or not that should or should not be included.
Okay. My feeling and my take on it, and I think I mentioned it, was that my worry would be that would make the building fronts an extremely hard edge to the street, as opposed to a landscape edge which they sort of have developed already. But that's kind of my thought on it. I don't know what everybody else thinks, because it's going to be the same issue with the handicap, well, similar issue to the handicap access, that it will require some concrete retaining walls and stairs and gates and things to create that connection.
That's what I was just going to touch on, is those elevations and going out. Or my humble opinion is that nobody's going to be going out there because of the traffic, and that access going in that way is a little over the top. If it was set back a substantial amount, I think it would make a heck of a lot more sense, especially from a streetscape look and what the city's trying to provide. My 2 cents.
Can I just make a comment? Is this all right, Charles?
Yeah, go ahead.
One of the things that always has been brought up by our clients on this is also security and the sense of security, especially for single family or single women that take the ground floor unit. And we don't want to, it's purposely done with the aesthetics. It's the links that are continuous on it, but we don't really want to have an access road from the street to those units themselves. The other thing is, because of the height change there, is we'd be introducing a lot of steps into all of those areas. In some areas it's 4 feet up, and so it's a significant grade change.
Yeah, and again, I would argue, not argue, I would say that improving the accessibility in terms of, handicap accessibility, but also just general ease of access and prominence of those main street entrances will make them more useful and usable for all the ground floor residents. So, I think if you put your effort there, that would be useful. Any other comments from panel members? Tyler?
The only other one, Charles, was looking at adding weather protection over the rear exit.
Okay, thank you.
I thought that David said there were roofs over those entrances. Was I mistaken?
Yeah, I have, and it could be a colored element. Right now, it's just showing a flat canopy over each of those in the model. I can show you what I have right now. If I can share my screen, is that all right, Charles?
No, it's okay. I think if you have canopies over the landings or over the doorways, I think the question the panel would be, does that fit the intent, or Kevin, are you thinking that those entire stairways should be covered?
No, just canopies are more than enough. Just a simple canopy over each door.
Okay. Yeah, I think I saw them. I saw them on your model. So. Okay. Tyler, you had any other comment? Yeah.
Yeah, just looking for a little bit of clarity on the accessibility one. It was just, did we land on just the general accessibility?
We have considered making improvements to the accessibility generally to all buildings.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, it's highly supportive of that. I think it's I forgot to mention, but I just want to think it's really awesome that you've got some 3-bedroom units in there and are doing some accessible units to see both in one building. I think it's not very common, so any effort to revisiting of that would be awesome, especially with those ramps out front. And just, Marie, to your question earlier around custom transit, it very much would probably go to the back door. I think it might, with the cycling facility on the front street, would have to serve the problem of if it picks someone up from the front entrance, it would actually block the cycling facility for a significant amount of time.
Good thing.
Okay, one last thing to add is there is a variance for height. We had a couple of comments. I think Tony commented he had no issue with it. If we include support for the height variance in the motion, is everybody okay with that? Any comments? No? Everybody's got thumbs up? Okay, so we have 4 recommendations. Laura, you want to read them, or? We can do it later? Okay, so we have 4 recommendations plus support for the height variance. Could I have a motion, please? Marie?
We have a motion to accept
Okay, with the variances, or with the recommendations?
the recommendations and support for the variance.
Okay, seconder?
I'll second that.
Okay, everybody seconding, great. And any discussion? No, seeing none, all in favor? Any opposed? Seeing none, that's great. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure.
Yeah, well done, you guys.
Thanks very much.
Great project.
Okay, so, panel members, I'm just going to I got to find my agenda, I lost it. So, panel members, next on our agenda is other business.
Sorry, for the recording?
Yeah, so I'm just going to remind them to stay on and then we'll adjourn.
Okay.
So we're just going to stay on so we can chat briefly about the procedures email, and then we can go. So if there's no other discussion, we can adjourn the meeting. All in favor? Thank you very much. Meeting's adjourned.